Very much for being here, and thank you very much for the invitation, Isaac and Luisa. It's a true pleasure to be with you this morning here in DC. And yes, so I'll be talking today about our new book, which is called Cybersecurity Economics for Emerging Markets. This is work that started about 2 years ago because we realized that there wasn't that much evidence or scientific evidence on the topic of cybersecurity for development, mainly on collecting data and collecting evidence on how cyber incidents affect developing countries and affect economic outcomes. So for that reason, we produced this report called Cybersecurity Economics for Emerging Markets, in which we prove that cybersecurity is not just about protection, it is a game changer for economic growth in developing nations. So let me start a little bit with the technical background. Cyberspace is a porous environment, and what we mean by this is that a fundamental aspect of digitalization lies in the ever-expanding cyber attack surface. This means as more people get connected to the internet, there's more internet devices, as there are more coders and more codes out there, this cyber attack surface expands, and with it, it expands the possibility of malicious actors to enter in this environment and cause what we call cyber incidents, or what sometimes people refer as cyber attacks. But this is a reality that we all know and that we all suffer from. But the thing that we found in this study is that the more challenging reality is the one that developing countries are facing. And I want you to look at this graph in which we are showing the change in the share of internet users after the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic was a catalyst for people to join the internet and start using internet services. And as you can see, developing countries are advancing in this digitalization process at the highest rates. But this is good, of course, because we know digitalization has it has a positive association with economic development, but it's risky because these are the same countries that are holding the lowest levels in terms of cybersecurity protection. And even more challenging is the fact that developing nations have yet to encounter the full extent of cyber threats. And what do we mean by this? Right now, in developing countries, the level of the percentage of internet users is around 63%. So these countries have yet to see the impact on their cyberspaces of reaching the above 85%, above 90% internet penetration levels of developed countries. So we expect that this is just going to become a bigger and bigger issue for developing countries. So what this work talks about, so this work demonstrates for the first time that reducing cyber incidents and investing in cybersecurity can, on one side, drive economic growth in developing nations, and on another side, safeguard services critical to the protection of human rights. In that way, making the link between this very technical, very computer science field, cybersecurity, with economic development. And for this, what we did is first we built a database, what we call the World Bank Media Disclosed Cyber Events Database, which is a database of all basically cyber incidents that have been released by media articles or by any open source in the internet. So for this, what we did is we use the Global Database of Events, Language, and Tone, GDELT, and we scraped all sorts of news, media sources, articles that talk about cybersecurity. So we found around 5 million articles in the last 10 years for around 190 countries. And then through a process of elimination, translation, filtering, and using GPT-4, we ended up having a total of around 30,000 valid uh, nationally relevant cyber incidents in 179 countries in the last 10 years. This database, we merged it with an excellent database by Harry and Gallagher, which they following a similar process of scraping media articles, and so they also build their own cyber events database, but mostly in developed countries. So we like to think that our database is mostly because we cover 98 different languages. Our database is strong in terms of like recording cyber incidents in developing countries, whereas Harry and Gallagher is strong in developed countries because they mostly, well, they only focus on articles written in English language. So using this database, we found a couple of very interesting things. And first, I'm going to walk you through the descriptive statistics, and later I'm going to walk you through the econometric modeling. So these are the descriptive statistics. So we found that disclosed cyber incidents worldwide have been growing at an average annual rate of 21% in the last decade. And we see particular increases in obviously some of the most wide known events in the last year, like the Russian Federation Ukraine war or the COVID-19 pandemic, and some other globally cyber attacks. And developing countries present approximately 30% of disclosed cyber incidents as of 2024, and they are distributed in this way. And although this is it is quite a difference, especially if we compare it to other countries like the United States or Canada, we do see that there is a trend, increasing trend in the percentage of cyber incidents that developing countries are receiving. And more shocking, we find that the world's region with the fastest growth of disclosed cyber incidents is Latin America and the Caribbean. And this goes hand in hand with what has been happening in terms of their expanding cyber attack surface since the pandemic. Since then, there has been an 145% increase in Internet of Things devices. E-commerce volume has increased by 280%, has been a greater adoption of e-government tools, and there is also the intrinsic commitment gaps. So actually, Latin America and the Caribbean rank the last in terms of cybersecurity commitments after Sub-Saharan Africa. And this sort of assessment of their cybersecurity commitments is done on 5 different pillars. And as we can see, the pillars that lagging the most is capacity building and technical and procedural measures, which are also the most costly pillars. So for that reason, cybersecurity in Latin America has become and is becoming a quite an increasing challenge for these countries. On the left-hand side, we can see the share of regions disclosed cyber incidents by number of incidents. And on the right-hand side, we can see it per million people. And once we see it at the per million people level, you can see that other countries, especially in Central America, get highlighted, right? And for example, we have here Panama, and also Bolivia and Chile, and these are countries that are struggling, even though they might not make big news like Brazil, for example, that constantly get many ransomware attacks. They are also struggling with cyber incidents. So based on this data and also using the Global Cybersecurity Index produced by ITU, we come out with some kind of like assessment of how countries are doing in terms of their cybersecurity progress. And we found that leaks or low-income countries are making remarkable advances in the cybersecurity path by looking at their variation in the global cybersecurity index from 2020 to versus 2024. And on the x-axis, looking at an exposure index that we built using around 30 different variables that we consider are relevant for giving an assessment of how exposed a country is to cyber incidents. And as you can imagine, here we use a couple of digital variables like internet penetration, but also economic variables, geopolitical assessment, and among others. So what we found, as I said, is here you can see the yellow sort of diamond shape countries. Those are low-income countries. Even though they are below exposure level, below the medium of the exposure level, these countries are making progress in their cybersecurity paths. And as a matter of fact, they rank above the medium in terms of their variation of the GCI. But so the cybersecurity economics framework that based on this assessment and based on these data descriptives we try to think about is basically we know that there are threats, right? So every country has, and every economic actor has some kind of threats, and with some level of probability that is affected by, on one side, the exposure factors like social factors, economic, political, technical, and digital, and another side, the level of cybersecurity. With some probability, these threats get translated into cyber incidents, and these cyber incidents also with some probability get translated into an effect or harm, which is an impediment to social economic progress. So this is the way in which we try to analyze the role of cybersecurity in going from threats to an actual effect or harm that is actually an impediment to socioeconomic progress. So, but how does it look in 2024? So before we saw the graph in which we saw the variation between 2020 and 2024. Here we see a graph of the risk assessment on 2024. So what I have done here is I have divided countries in 4 clusters. So we have the countries in the rapid response zone. These are countries that are highly exposed, but they are also highly protected. And as you can see, these countries are mostly high-income countries, very exposed countries, but also they have invested quite a lot on cybersecurity. But they are, I'm referring to them as rapid response zone because these are countries that continuously need to keep investing in cybersecurity due to their very high levels of exposure. And then we have the maintenance zone. There are countries that are doing very well. Actually, they're having a preventive attitude. Even though they are below the medium of exposure, they have above median levels of protection. And here we mostly see low middle income countries and some upper middle income countries and some low income countries. So these are countries that are being preventive, as I said. So they have to continue on this, falling in this category. And then we have the critical area. And these are mostly low-income countries or low-middle-income countries. And why do I say these are critical area is because based on the levels of digitalization that we see, unless these countries keep making remarkable progress in cybersecurity, they will eventually fall in the priority zone, which is the zone in which there's very high exposure, but low levels of protection. And here we have countries like Argentina, Venezuela, Iran, and others that have that probably need to prioritize cybersecurity. So this is how the landscape of cyber incidents look like. And when we look at this problem here, our question was like, okay, so what are the policy recommendations that we can start gathering from these descriptive statistics? So generally, we found that the policy recommendations that are given in cybersecurity are sort of like a one policy fits all type of approach. But that's really one of the big things that we prove in this work is that that's not really um, that's not really efficient. And the reason for that is because the landscape looks completely different between developing countries and high-income countries. As a matter of fact, you can see that in high-income countries, around 80% of cyber incidents have a financial motive, whereas in developing countries, around 60%, the majority of cyber incidents have a political motive. So it's completely different landscapes. Even though the problem is sort of the same, this gives us a hint that the tools and the means need to be different. And so the political aspect is quite important. And as a matter of fact, worldwide, we see more and more increase in the percentage of national level elections targeted by cyber attacks. So this is one of the first message from this database, to prioritize the political motives in developing countries. And then at the sectoral landscape, we also see important difference. So first, as a introduction, I just want to mention that according to IBM, the cost of a data breach is the highest in healthcare, followed by financial sector, followed by pharmaceutical. This plays a big role in developed countries, but not really in developing countries. So if we see the distribution of cyber incidents by income group, you can see the majority of cyber incidents in developing countries, the yellow ones, are in public administration. It's around 35%, followed by information and communications, and then finance and insurance. And these three sectors, they hold a big chunk of all cyber incidents. Whereas in high-income countries, the distribution is more even. The top is healthcare, followed by public administration, and then educational services, but they are more evenly distributed, right? So not only we see a difference in the motive, but also we see a difference in the victims. And of course we ask, like, does this have to do something with different reporting rules? Because remember, we are looking only at reported cyber incidents, right? Like who knows what the unreported cyber incidents landscape look like. But because of the big difference that we see here, the trends in the unreported subset will have to be quite strongly different than these ones in order to see an important change in the overall trend, right, in the overall distribution. So based on this, we sort of have some reflections to make. In terms of finance, our reflections are that there is a need to focus on the two best practices working well in high-income countries. And there is a market approach in high-income countries in which there is a competitive national cybersecurity market for cybersecurity products and services tailored for this specific sector. And there is also a regulatory approach in terms that there is robust regulatory bodies that continuously monitor safety and stability. On healthcare, which is another one of the very important sectors, our reflection is that the landscape in high-income countries serve as a warning for the digitalizing health sector in developing countries. So, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, healthcare sector is digitalizing at a very high rate. So it's important that this digitalization process goes hand in hand with cybersecurity. In public administration, as we saw, it's a priority in both types of countries. And then we have perhaps the most critical sectors, right? Utilities, energy, transport, and ICT. It's important to recognize that cybersecurity is essential for safeguarding these services, which are closely linked to human rights protection. So in our book, we also make the first claim of cybersecurity actually being linked to protection of human rights through these critical services. So based on this sort of assessment of this data and the literature and all of the things that I mentioned, we know that cybersecurity is essential for the socioeconomic progress of nations. But the question is, how do we prove it, right? How do we go, as economists, we know that we cannot prove something just with descriptive statistics. So this was me a few months ago, trying to gather how do we prove this. So as an economist, we took an econometric approach, right? And the first thing we did is we built a cross-country, cross-industry model, the typical cross-country, cross-industry model, in which we have on the left-hand side the value added of a given industry in a given country, measured by the compound growth rate of industry J in country I between 2014 and 2021. And on the right-hand side, we have a couple of predictors like the level of cybersecurity commitment at the beginning of this analysis. This is in 2014 in country I, interacted with the vulnerability of the sector. So the level of exposure to cyber incidents in sector J, and a couple of controls. So what this model told us is very revealing. So and this is something that is coming up in a forthcoming paper. But what we found is that given countries' initial levels of cybersecurity commitments, the residual growth rate of industries that are more exposed to cyber incidents is negative in countries with low cybersecurity scores and positive in countries with high cybersecurity scores. This means that keeping everything else constant, industries that are more digitalized or more exposed to cyber incidents, they are doing better in countries that have higher initial levels of cybersecurity commitments. And this is big because it's the first evidence that we have to prove that there is actually a link between cybersecurity investments and an economic outcome. And then we went to a dynamic panel estimation model to sort of assess a more macro view, a view in which we have, on one hand, on the left-hand side, we have GDP per capita, and on the right-hand side, we have the number of disclosed cyber incidents in country I in time t, and following the usual dynamic panel model estimation. And what we found is, first we found statistically significant correlations, and we found that developing countries, that the impact, the economic impact of cyber incidents is likely higher in developing countries. As you can see here, beta for developing countries is it's higher, it's more negative, or it has a broader range in the negative side than the beta for high-income countries. So, and this makes sense if we take into consideration the low levels of, or the relative low levels of cybersecurity commitments in these countries. So again, this is very, very important, and our main counterfactual from this is that a developing country that reduces its major disclosed cyber incidents from the top quartile of the distribution to the bottom quartile of the distribution in a decade could see an increase in GDP per capita of approximately 1.5%. And many of you might have probably read Professor Acemoglu's latest paper on the impact of AI. And basically his predictions is that generative AI in a decade will have an impact on GDP of around 1%. So what we are finding here is quite big, is if a country manages to invest well in cybersecurity protections, and if they manage to decrease cyber incidents, then they can be having an impact perhaps even greater of what we are estimating for generative AI. And then we have a couple more say more suggestions or policy solutions. policy recommendations for the overall market. And this, one of the things that I want to point out is that this is a market that is growing very fast all around the world. So global spending on information security and risk management accounts for around 0.2% of the world's GDP, but this market is projected to surge by over 14% in 2024. So the rapid growth is anticipated to continue, especially in cloud security, data privacy, and data security sectors. And the spending on professional security services will remain dominant, with around 40% of the global market. However, despite the growth, the cybersecurity industry is highly constrained by inadequate investment in research and development, low public cybersecurity awareness, and large gap of highly skilled cybersecurity professionals. As a matter of fact, it's estimated that there is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals of around 4.5 million. That's around 2% of the world's unemployment levels. So investing in cybersecurity talent, it's quite important, not only for the market, but also it could be good for the economies. And also another problem in this market is that this is a market largely influenced by high-income countries on market dynamics. Through these countries make substantial procurements, so they have high market power. They are the ones that put customized standards and certifications, and they are the ones that running most of the investments in research and development. So it's a market that has been designed to find solutions for high-income countries, and this is quite a problem because, as we saw, the landscape is completely different for developing and developed countries. And also, it's a market filled with sources of market failures. As I mentioned, there is low cybersecurity awareness, especially in developing countries. The risk of vendors is very high. At least 90% of organizations worldwide maintain business ties with third-party vendors that have recently experienced a cyber incident. And almost 60% of meetings firms translate losses from cyber incidents into price hikes. This is another one of the big findings from the literature. So the lessons learned and recommendations from going through like these descriptive statistics, this model estimation, and this market analysis is that it's important to strengthen national cybersecurity industries. So investing in one way to strengthen cybersecurity industry is to work from the demander side, right? From the demand. Investing in public cybersecurity awareness, how this can drive demand for cybersecurity products and services, of course, and reduce some sources of market failures. So there is a lot of work to do, especially in developing countries, in terms of make people aware of how important it is to invest in cybersecurity, make firms aware, and there is very little literature on exactly how can we create incentives for firms to invest in cybersecurity. It's important to encourage startups as well, and to support the development of highly skilled cybersecurity force. We also recommend creating incentives to invest in cybersecurity. So we need to rethink how to assess the cybersecurity returns on investment. As of today, cybersecurity is still driven by a cost-saving rationale, but these models don't work because I mean, how can we put a price to our data and to our privacy and to essential services? So there is a need for economists to start thinking about how to assess the returns on investment on cybersecurity from a theoretical and a practical way. Right now, the only model that we have, which is a great model, has not yet captured this part. It's still thinking about cybersecurity as cost-saving rationale, as I said, and I said it's a great model because it's the only one we have, and it was written more than 10 years ago, but it's time to update it. And then we have also to recognize cybersecurity as a growth driver and continue gathering scientific evidence to move beyond anecdotal cases For example, there is a need to have a standardized and safe collection of data from countries. Countries like the UK and the US have started collecting and having databases on cyber incidents. And there's regulations for firms that whenever they face a cyber incident, they have to report it. But most countries, around 90% of countries, they do not have such policies. And therefore, it's a challenge to actually see what's going on in these countries, unless we go through the great lengths that we went in this work of gathering so much data and then trying to identify it and so on. There is a need to have shared terminology um, and national cybersecurity research and development strategic plans. As part of the data gathering, it's also, and as part of the economic impact, um, stakeholders need to monitor and act proactively, so track both short and long-term indirect losses from cyber incidents. And the economic literature on this is very clear. The indirect losses are way higher, and the cascading effects are quite disrupting. So there is a need to incorporate those findings from scientists on actual policies. It's also important to prioritize the most vulnerable cyber personas in critical sectors, especially small, medium enterprises, encourage cyber audits, and also to have private-public collaboration on risk management efforts. And finally, and the most important, I think, message is that we need to advocate and support tailored research on the economics of cybersecurity. This is one of the first works on economics of cybersecurity, and I think we have really made a change on actually creating evidence to find solutions for this problem. But we need more colleagues, more economists to start looking at this problem and to start sort of tackling some of the very challenging things that we see in this field. As some of them I mentioned, like the market side, creating incentives, modeling impact, and so on. So it is at the end of the day, this work is a call to economists to start thinking about this problem, to start investing their time and their efforts on economics of cybersecurity. So our main conclusion is that efficient cybersecurity is essential for the socio-economic progress of nations. So not just cybersecurity, but efficient cybersecurity. We see high-income countries spending a lot of money on cybersecurity, and we want to also make the case for efficient cybersecurity, especially because we think about developing countries and their budget constraints. So that's my message, and thank you very much, everyone, for your attention, and I hope you can read the book. The digital version is free, and you can download it. And there is also a paper version that you can buy it on Amazon and Google and basically most bookstores worldwide. Thank you very much.